You were only ever the placeholder, Meredith. This seat is for the son who will carry the name. My father said that to me on a Friday night, in front of 23 people, at a dinner I had organized, at a restaurant I had booked, paid for with a company credit card tied to an account I had managed for 14 years. I didn't flinch. I didn't push back from the table. I set my fork down, folded my napkin once across my lap, and looked at him the way you look at someone who has just told you exactly who they are for the last time. I said, "I understand perfectly, Howard. I'll have my desk cleared by midnight." He smiled. My mother laughed. My brother Evan raised his glass. None of them understood what I just said. If you've ever had a family member treat you like you didn't matter, hit that like button and subscribe. Let me back up. Because that dinner didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened after 14 years of silence, 14 years of labor, and 14 years of pretending that being useful and being loved were the same thing. My name is Meredith Miller. I'm 37 years old. I'm a widow. My husband David died 4 years ago in a car accident. And when the grief settled into something I could carry, I picked up my daughter Lily, and I kept going. I kept going to the same office I'd walked into at 23, straight out of my master's program, when my father Howard asked me to come help with a family business, Miller Logistics, a mid-size freight operation based out of Indianapolis. When I started, the company was running on paper manifests, fax confirmations, and a Rolodex my father kept in his desk drawer. Revenue was around $900,000 a year, most of it from 3 legacy accounts that stayed out of loyalty to my grandfather. The routing was inefficient. The carrier contracts were outdated. The tracking system didn't exist. I built one. Over the next 14 years, I designed and implemented a proprietary shipment tracking system from scratch. I personally onboarded 23 carrier API integrations. I negotiated every contract. I managed every renewal. I wrote the operational protocols that turned a $900,000 company into a $3.8 million operation. And I did it at a discount. My market rate salary for an operations director, with my credentials and my track record, should have been north of $140,000 a year. My father paid me $102,000. He called it the family rate. He said it was what we did for each other. He said the difference was my investment in the future of the company. I accepted it. For 14 years, that difference, compounded over time, totaled $525,000. $500,000 I left on the table because I believed my father when he said family takes care of family. That wasn't the only money. In 2019, Howard came to me privately. He had a tax lien. The IRS was threatening to place a hold on the company's operating accounts. He needed $115,000 to settle it. He didn't go to a bank. He didn't consult a financial advisor. He came to me at my kitchen table while Lily was asleep upstairs, and he asked me to write a personal check. I wrote it. He said he'd pay it back within 18 months. That was 5 years ago. I never saw a dollar. Then there was Evan. My brother is 31 years old, 6 years younger than me. When I was building carrier relationships and coding tracking protocols, Evan was finishing a communications degree he took 6 years to complete. When I was negotiating a $1.2 million account with Sarah Brooks at Midland Freight Partners, Evan was posting photos from a ski trip in Aspen that my parents paid for. 3 years ago, my father put Evan on the payroll. Not in the office, on the payroll. His title was Strategic Development Consultant. His salary was $78,000 a year. His output was exactly zero. He attended no meetings. He managed no routes. He couldn't tell you the difference between an LTL shipment and a full truckload if you spotted him the first 3 letters. But he had the name. And in my father's mind, that was enough. I paid $45,000 of my own money for Evan's business school tuition 2 years before that. He dropped out after 1 semester. He said the program wasn't rigorous enough for his vision. I swallowed that too. 18 months ago, I noticed something in the quarterly statements. My performance bonuses, which had been consistent for 9 years, suddenly stopped. I asked Howard about it. He said the company was tightening the budget. But the books told a different story. The money hadn't disappeared. It had been redirected. My bonuses were being reclassified as consulting fees and routed directly to Evan's account. My father was taking my earned compensation and handing it to my brother. I documented every transaction. I saved every pay stub, every reclassification memo, every email. I said nothing. I kept working. I kept the system running. I kept the carriers integrated. I kept the clients happy. I told myself this was simply what family did. And then came the dinner. Howard booked a private dining room at Whitfield's on Market Street. 23 guests, extended family, a few business associates, two of our largest carrier contacts, white tablecloths, candles in low glass holders, a prix-fixe menu that cost $187 per head, charged to the company card. I had arranged the reservation, I had sent the invitations, I had confirmed the dietary restrictions and the parking validation, because that's what I did. I handled the details no one else even thought about. Lily came with me. She wore a navy dress we'd picked out together. She sat next to me, quiet and polite, her hands in her lap. She'd learned early how to be small at Miller family events. She'd had practice. Howard stood at the head of the table after the main course. He tapped his glass with a butter knife. The room went quiet. He talked about legacy, about the Miller name, about what it meant to build something that lasted. He talked about his father, about the early days, about sacrifice and vision. Then he said it. I'm retiring, effective immediately, and I'm proud to announce that my son, Evan, will be stepping into the role of Chief Executive Officer of Miller Logistics. The room applauded. Evan stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He shook my father's hand. My mother wiped her eyes with a corner of a cloth napkin like she was watching a coronation. No one looked at me. Howard wasn't finished. Meredith, of course, will stay on to support the transition. We're restructuring her role to executive assistant so Evan can have the operational visibility he needs. Executive assistant, 14 years, a $3.8 million operation, 23 carrier integrations, a proprietary system no one else in that room could even log into. And my new title was executive assistant. I stayed still. I kept my hands flat on the table. Lily's fingers found my sleeve under the tablecloth. She held on. Evan leaned forward, glass in hand, grinning. Don't worry, Mare. I'll make sure you still get the good parking spot. The table laughed. My mother laughed the loudest. I stayed quiet, letting him continue. My father sat back down. He looked satisfied. He looked like a man who had just solved a puzzle he'd been working on for years, the puzzle of how to give his son everything without having to admit his daughter had built it. But it was my mother who delivered the real blow. Patricia leaned across the table toward Lily. My daughter, 9 years old, sitting in her navy dress with her hands in her lap, trying to be invisible. Now, Lily, Patricia said, her voice carrying that bright, brittle tone she used when she wanted everyone to hear. There are going to be some changes. The Family Education Fund is going to be restructured now that Evan is in charge. We need to reserve those resources for the real Miller heirs. Evan's future children will need proper schooling. She paused. She smiled. You'll have to make do with the public district, dear. Real Miller heirs come first. The table went quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from shock. The kind that comes from permission. The kind that says everyone heard it and no one is going to say a word. Lily's hand tightened on my sleeve. I looked down. Her knuckles were white. Her chin was trembling. But she didn't cry. She just stared at the tablecloth like she was trying to disappear into it. My father cleared his throat the same way he'd done for 30 years. He didn't look up from his plate. He didn't speak. Something inside me snapped. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a clean, quiet break. I looked at my mother. I looked at my father. I looked at Evan still grinning, still holding his glass like a trophy he hadn't earned. It's a logistics company, Meredith, Howard said, settling into his chair like the conversation was already over. You move boxes. Evan has the vision to move the brand. Your daughter will understand when she's older that some people are born to lead and others are born to support. I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, nothing. The $525,000 in suppressed salary, the $115,000 personal loan that vanished, the $45,000 in tuition for a semester Evan couldn't finish, the 18 months of stolen bonuses, 14 years of building a system that ran on credentials only I controlled, credentials tied to my thumbprint, my face, my phone, my biometric data that no one in that room could replicate or transfer. 23 carrier API integrations. Every single one requiring multi-factor authentication renewal every 72 hours. Every single renewal requiring my physical authorization. And they had just told me I was the placeholder. I picked up my fork. I finished my creme brulee. I wiped my mouth with a cloth napkin. I pushed my chair back slowly. I understand perfectly, Howard, I said. My voice was steady. I'll have my desk cleared by midnight. Howard nodded. Patricia smiled. Evan winked at one of the business associates across the table. I took Lily's hand. She slid out of her chair without a sound. We walked out of the private dining room, through the restaurant, past the hostess stand, and into the parking lot. The engine started with a low, steady hum. I pulled out of the lot without looking back. Lily was quiet for 3 blocks. Then her voice came from the back seat, small and cracked, right down the middle. "Mom, what did Grandma mean about real heirs?" I adjusted the rearview mirror so I could see her face. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. She was waiting. She was 9 years old, and she was waiting for me to tell her whether or not she mattered. I kept my voice even. "She meant that some people decide love has conditions, sweetheart." And she just showed us hers. Lily was quiet for another block. Then she said, "Are we going to be okay?" I looked at her reflection. I looked at the road. I looked at the dark stretch of highway ahead of us, and I thought about a 72-hour renewal window that would open at exactly 8:01 a.m. on Monday morning. "Yes," I said, "we're going to be just fine." The house was dark when we got home. I carried Lily inside, tucked her in, and stood in her doorway until her breathing slowed. Then I walked to the kitchen. I sat at the island with coffee that would go cold before I touched it. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was sharp. It was clear. I opened my laptop. The screen cast a pale blue light across the counter. The AWS console loaded in 3 seconds, and for the first time in 14 years, I felt ready to face the truth I'd been avoiding. They didn't need me. They never wanted me. But every single system they depended on was waiting for a thumbprint they would never have again. I closed the laptop. Not yet. Monday was 72 hours away. I could wait. I sat at that kitchen island until the coffee went cold. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the hallway clock. The street light cut through the blinds in thin white lines across the counter. I didn't move for a long time. I thought about the first week I walked into Miller Logistics. I was 23. I had a master's degree and a folder full of ideas and a father who said he needed me. The office smelled like old carpet and diesel exhaust from the loading dock next door. The filing cabinets were dented. The phone system dropped calls twice an hour. The biggest client we had was a regional hardware chain that paid net 90 and complained about everything. I fixed all of it. I replaced the phone system. I digitized the filing. I built a tracking platform from a blank database because we couldn't afford to buy one. I taught myself API integration from documentation forums at 2 a.m. while my father slept and my mother redecorated the living room and my brother failed his sophomore midterms for the 2nd consecutive year. And every single one of those integrations, all 23 of them, was registered under my name. My credentials, my biometric authentication. Not because I was hoarding control, because I was the only person in the company who understood how the system worked. Howard never asked. Evan never cared. The carriers needed a verified administrative contact for their multi-factor authentication protocols, and that contact was me, my thumbprint, my face ID. My phone? Every 72 hours, the system pinged for renewal authorization. A simple confirmation, a biometric scan that took 4 seconds. I had done it so many times over so many years that it was automatic, like breathing, like something the body does without being asked. The body had just been told it was a placeholder. I sat there until 11:47 p.m. Then I opened the laptop again. The AWS console loaded. The dashboard was familiar. Every module, every integration tile, every status indicator. Green across the board, 23 carrier connections, all active, all healthy, all waiting for their next renewal window. I navigated to the credential management panel. The auto-renew settings were listed in a clean column. Each carrier had its own line. Each line had a toggle. I didn't delete anything. I didn't corrupt any files. I didn't change any passwords or revoke any access keys. I didn't touch the data. I unchecked the auto-renew box. 1 click for each carrier. 23 clicks. Each one made a soft, barely audible confirmation tone through the laptop speakers. In the dead silence of my kitchen, each one sounded like a lock turning. The system would continue running normally through the weekend. The existing authentication tokens were valid for their current cycle. But when the 72-hour renewal window opened at 8:01 a.m. on Monday morning, the system would send its standard biometric verification request to my device, and I would not answer it. Not because I was sabotaging anything, because I was no longer an employee of Miller Logistics. My father had restructured my role in front of 23 witnesses and 2 carrier contacts. I had accepted the restructuring and tendered my verbal resignation in the same breath. My desk was cleared. My company laptop was in a box by the front door, ready to be returned. My personal device, The one tied to every authentication protocol in the system was mine. It had always been mine. Arthur Wright, my attorney, had confirmed this 18 months ago when I first noticed the bonus reclassifications. I had called him on a Tuesday afternoon, sat in my car in the parking lot of Lily's school, and asked him a single question. If I leave the company, what happens to the credentials? His answer was 3 sentences long. The authentication is tied to your personal biometric data and your personal device. The company never purchased an enterprise license or established a secondary administrative contact. If you separate from the company, the credentials leave with you. I asked him to put that in writing. He did. I saved the letter on a USB drive in my home safe, next to David's life insurance documents and Lily's birth certificate. That was 18 months ago, 18 months of watching my bonuses get funneled to Evan, 18 months of documentation, 18 months of knowing exactly what the system would do when I stopped feeding it. I closed the laptop. I rinsed the cold coffee down the sink. I checked on Lily once more, her breathing slow and even under the quilt we'd picked out together, the one with the tiny yellow stars. I went to bed. I slept through the night for the first time in months. Saturday passed quietly. Sunday passed the same way. Lily and I made pancakes. We walked to the park. She asked if we could get a dog. I said, maybe. I didn't check my phone. I didn't open my email. I didn't call anyone. At 8:01 a.m. on Monday, 23 renewal requests hit my personal device simultaneously, 23 biometric verification prompts, 23 carrier integrations asking for the thumbprint of a woman who no longer worked at Miller Logistics. I was making Lily's lunch at the time, turkey on wheat, apple slices, a juice box. My phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at the notification cluster, 23 system alerts stacked in a column, each one marked urgent. I set the juice box in the lunchbox. I zipped it closed. I drove Lily to school. I kissed her forehead at the drop-off lane. By 8:47 a.m., every carrier integration had timed out. The tracking system went dark. 23 connections, severed simultaneously, not by malice, but by absence. The system didn't crash. It simply stopped being able to verify that it had permission to operate. I was sitting in my kitchen, reading, when my phone rang at 9:12 a.m. Evan. I let it ring 4 times. Then I answered. His voice was high, fast, stripped of every ounce of the confidence he'd performed on Friday night. Meredith, the system is down. Everything is down. I can't get into the carrier portal. I can't pull the tracking dashboard. I can't do anything. What did you do? I kept my voice steady. I didn't do anything, Evan. The whole thing is locked. 23 carriers are showing authentication failures. I've been on the phone with Midwest Freight for 20 minutes, and they're telling me the admin contact credentials have expired. They're saying they can't reconnect without biometric verification from the registered account holder. That's correct. So come in and fix it. I don't work there anymore. Silence. 3 full seconds of silence. What are you talking about? Dad said you were staying on for the transition. Dad said I was being demoted to executive assistant. I said I'd have my desk cleared by midnight. I did. My resignation was effective Friday evening. Arthur Wright filed the formal documentation this morning. You can't just... The whole system runs on your login. It runs on my biometric data, my personal thumbprint, my personal face ID on my personal device, which belongs to me. So give us the codes. There are no codes to give, Evan. The system requires a physical biometric scan. My physical biometric scan. It can't be transferred. It can't be copied. It can't be overridden. That's how multi-factor authentication works. Then come in and do the scan. No. Meredith, the encryption isn't broken, Evan. It's waiting for a thumbprint it no longer has permission to ask for. I'm not a Miller heir, remember. I'm just the placeholder. He hung up. My phone buzzed 11 more times in the next hour. I didn't answer. I made a second cup of coffee. I drank it while it was still warm. At 11:03 a.m., Howard called. I let it go to voicemail. He called again at 11:07 and 11:11 and 11:15. At 11:22, my mother called. I pressed decline without hesitation. At 1:47 p.m., a text from Evan. Do you have any idea what you've done? We have 14 shipments sitting in 3 different terminals with no tracking, no routing confirmation, no carrier verification. Midland Freight is threatening a $68,000 penalty for the first batch alone. I read it. I set the phone down. At 3:30, I picked up Lily from school. She climbed into the back seat with her backpack and a drawing of a house with a yellow door. She said she'd had a good day. I said I was glad. At 6:14 p.m., the doorbell rang. I was standing at the kitchen counter cutting vegetables for dinner. Lily was at the table doing math homework. The doorbell rang once, then twice, then 3 times in rapid succession. I wiped my hands on a dish towel. I walked to the front door. I looked through the sidelight window. Howard and Evan standing on my porch. Howard's tie was loosened, his collar dark with sweat. Evan's shirt was untucked, his face flushed, his hair pushed back like he'd been running his hands through it for hours. I didn't open the front door. I opened the screen door 3 inches and stood behind it with my hand on the frame. Meredith. Howard's voice was strained, controlled, but barely. We need to talk about this. There's nothing to talk about. The system is completely inoperable. We've lost routing on 14 active shipments. Midwest Freight is assessing penalties. Great Lakes is threatening contract termination. Sarah Brooks at Midland called my office directly and told me that if her Tuesday shipment doesn't move on schedule, she's pulling her entire account. That's $1.2 million in annual revenue, Meredith. I know exactly what Sarah's account is worth. I negotiated it. Then come back. Temporarily, just long enough to get the system transferred to a new admin. That process takes 60 to 90 days, requires full IT infrastructure migration, and costs between $80,000 and $120,000 in vendor recertification fees. I know because I researched it 3 years ago when I recommended we establish a backup administrative contact. You said it wasn't in the budget. Howard's jaw tightened. Evan stepped forward. This is insane. You're holding the company hostage over a title change. I'm not holding anything. I resigned. You accepted. The credentials are biometrically bound to me. I can't give them to you any more than I can give you my fingerprints. And even if I could, I wouldn't, because I don't work for you. You're going to destroy this company. No, Evan, you're going to destroy this company. That's what happens when the person who built every system walks out and the person who replaced her can't tell the difference between an LTL shipment and a full truckload. Evan's face went white. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Howard exhaled slowly. He looked at me through the screen door with an expression I had never seen before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't contempt. It was the look of a man who had just done the math. The penalties alone could exceed $400,000. He said quietly, $412,000. I said, based on the current penalty structures in 8 of your 23 carrier contracts, assuming a 7-day resolution window, which you won't meet because you don't have anyone on staff who can rebuild those integrations. And once the breach clauses trigger, the carriers have the right to terminate. If even a third of them do, you'll lose roughly 35% of your annual revenue. That's $1.33 million. The number hung in the air between us. And that's before Sarah Brooks makes her call, I added. Howard's hands were shaking, not visibly, but I could see the tremor in his fingers where they gripped the porch railing. Meredith. His voice dropped. Please. I looked at my father. I looked at the man who had taken $525,000 of my labor at a discount and called it family, who had taken $115,000 of my savings and never returned it, who had paid $45,000 of my money for a degree his son abandoned, who had stolen my bonuses for 18 months and given them to a brother who had never worked a single day in the building I built, who had looked at me in front of 23 people and called me the placeholder, who had sat silent while his wife told my 9-year-old daughter that she wasn't a real heir. I didn't sabotage your future, Dad, I said. My voice was even. My hand was steady on the doorframe. I just stopped donating mine. I stepped back. The screen door closed with a soft click. The lock turned. I walked back to the kitchen, picked up the knife, and continued cutting vegetables. Through the window, I could see them standing on the porch, Howard staring at the closed door, Evan looking at his phone like it might save him. They stood there for 4 full minutes. Then they turned and walked back to the car. The engine started. The headlights swept across the front yard. The taillights faded down the street. The house was quiet. Lily looked up from her homework. Who was that? Nobody important, I said. How's the math going? She held up her worksheet. I got all of them right. That's my girl. I turned off the ringer on my phone. I set it face down on the counter. I finished making dinner. The house was still. The streetlight cut through the blinds. Lily hummed something soft while she colored on the back of her worksheet. I didn't look back. The weeks following that Monday felt like walking through a door into a room I'd forgotten existed. A room where the air was clean and the walls were mine. I blocked every number. Howard's cell, Patricia's landline, Evan's phone. I removed myself from the family group chat, the shared photo album Patricia had created for holidays, the email chain Howard used to send company updates he pretended were family newsletters. I deleted the Miller Logistics contact card from my phone. I removed Howard as my emergency contact at Lily's school and replaced him with Arthur Wright. I didn't do it in anger. I did it in clarity. For 3 days, the notifications had piled up before I blocked them. 41 missed calls, 19 voicemails, over 100 texts. I didn't listen to a single voicemail. I didn't read a single text past the preview line. The previews were enough. Patricia said, "You're tearing this family apart over a dinner." Evan said, "You need to call me back right now." Howard said, "We can discuss a consulting arrangement." I deleted them all without opening them. On Wednesday, a letter arrived from a law firm I didn't recognize. I opened it at the kitchen table while Lily was at school. It was a demand letter on behalf of Miller Logistics, asserting that my failure to maintain credential access constituted willful destruction of company property and demanding I return to the premises within 48 hours to facilitate system restoration. I forwarded it to Arthur Wright. He responded in 14 minutes. His email was 2 sentences. Their claim has no legal basis. The credentials are personal property tied to biometric data on a personal device, and your employment contract, which Howard never updated, permits immediate resignation upon involuntary title change. I've sent my response. You won't hear from them again. I didn't. The following Tuesday, my phone rang from a number I recognized. Sarah Brooks. I answered on the second ring. "Meredith, I heard what happened. News travels fast. Not fast enough. I've been on the phone with your brother for 3 days. He can't find my Tuesday shipment. He can't tell me where it is when it's moving or which carrier has it. He offered to call me back 6 times and never did. I've been doing business with Miller Logistics for 9 years because of you. I called Howard this morning and told him I'm pulling my account." "I'm sorry to hear that, Sarah." "Don't be. I'm calling because I need a logistics consultant. Someone who actually understands carrier management, API integration, and how to keep a $1.2 million freight operation running without losing a single container. You wouldn't happen to know anyone like that, would you?" I didn't smile, but something loosened in my chest, something I've been carrying for 14 years. "I might," I said. That Friday, I filed the incorporation paperwork for Miller Strategic Consulting. Arthur Wright handled the registration. The office was a modest suite across town, 1,200 square feet with good light and a conference room that seated 6. I signed the lease on a Saturday morning while Lily sat in the empty reception area and drew pictures of dogs on the back of the floor plan. Sarah Brooks signed a retainer agreement the following Monday, $14,500 a month. Her entire freight management portfolio? She wasn't the only one. Within 3 weeks, 2 more former Miller Logistics clients reached out. Greg Taylor at Summit Hardware called on a Wednesday. Janet Davis at Heartland Medical Supply called that Friday. Both told me the same thing. The shipments were late, the tracking was gone. The new management couldn't answer basic questions about carrier status or routing confirmation. I signed them both. $8,200 a month from Summit, $11,400 from Heartland. Combined with Sarah's retainer, I was generating $34,100 in monthly revenue before my office furniture was fully delivered. I didn't reach out to any of them. They came to me, every single one. The rot at Miller Logistics started slowly, and then it didn't. Within the first 30 days, the late shipment penalties hit $412,000. 8 carrier contracts triggered breach clauses and terminated. The tracking system sat dark because the vendor recertification process Evan had been quoted at $94,000 required a minimum 60-day implementation timeline, and that was before they could even begin rebuilding the integrations from scratch. Evan hired an outside IT firm. They lasted 11 days. The lead technician told Howard directly that the proprietary system I'd built was so deeply customized that migration would require a full architectural redesign. The estimate came back at $187,000. Howard didn't have it, not after the penalties. Sarah Brooks pulled her account on schedule. That was $1.2 million in annual revenue gone with a single phone call. 2 weeks later, Greg Taylor pulled Summit Hardware. Janet Davis followed 8 days after that. By the end of the first quarter, Miller Logistics had lost 35% of its annual revenue, $1.33 million. The number I'd quoted Howard on my porch, down to the dollar. The warehouse on the east side of Indianapolis, the $1.4 million facility Howard had leveraged to fund Evan's salary, and the office renovations Patricia had insisted on, went on the market 91 days after the dinner. It sold for $1.08 million, less than they owed. I heard about it through industry channels. I didn't go looking. Evan's strategic development consultant title lasted exactly 47 days as CEO before the board. Howard had never bothered to formalize became irrelevant. There was no board. There was no strategy. There was a 31-year-old man sitting in an office he couldn't operate, fielding calls from carriers who wouldn't speak to him because their system credentials had been tied to someone he'd called a placeholder. By the 6th month, the office had moved. The new location was a shared commercial suite off of Pendleton Pike. 2 rooms, shared parking. The receptionist was gone. The second logistics coordinator was gone. Evan was answering his own phones. Howard, 68 years old, went back to work. Not as CEO, not as president. He drove routes. 3 days a week, he climbed into a 10-year-old company van and drove local deliveries himself because they couldn't afford a replacement driver after the third one quit over missed paychecks. Patricia stopped attending the women's luncheon at their country club. I heard from a mutual acquaintance, someone I hadn't spoken to in months, who happened to mention it at Lily's school pickup, that the membership had been quietly suspended, dues unpaid. The acquaintance said Patricia told people they were simplifying their lifestyle. Voluntary, a choice. The $115,000 Howard owed me was never repaid. I had stopped expecting it years ago. But the $45,000 I'd spent on Evan's single semester of business school, the degree he abandoned because the program wasn't rigorous enough for his vision, that number stayed in my records. Not because I wanted it back, because I wanted to remember what I had paid to learn who they really were. Evan's wife, Tiffany, filed for legal separation at the 8-month mark. I didn't know the details. I didn't ask. The information arrived the way all of it did, through the peripheral noise of a small city where freight companies talk to each other and people remember who built the systems that used to work. By the 10-month mark, Miller Logistics had filed for Chapter 11 reorganization. Annual revenue had dropped to $1.9 million, barely half of what it had been when I walked out. The filing listed $623,000 in outstanding debts, including carrier penalties, vendor invoices, and the remaining balance on the warehouse mortgage. I read about it in the Indianapolis Business Journal. A 4-paragraph item on page 11. I read it once. I closed the page. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel vindication. I felt the same thing I'd felt the night I unchecked those 23 boxes. Nothing. And then, underneath the nothing, something quieter. Relief. 1 year later, everything had changed. Miller Strategic Consulting had 7 clients. Annual revenue was on pace to clear $620,000. I had hired 2 employees, both women I'd worked with in the carrier network, who had reached out after hearing what happened. The office across town had a small kitchen, a whiteboard wall in the conference room, and a framed drawing by the front door. Lily had drawn it the day we signed the lease. It was a house with a yellow door and 2 stick figures holding hands. Lily was 10. She'd made honor roll both semesters. She'd joined the school's coding club, which made me laugh the first time she told me because she didn't know yet that her mother had taught herself API integration from online forums at 2 a.m. She would, someday. She was enrolled at Westfield Academy. Tuition was $22,000 a year. I paid it from the business account without blinking. No family fund, no committee, no conditions, just a mother writing a check for her daughter's future, because that's what family actually looks like. We had a small house with a backyard and a fence. Lily got her dog, a beagle mix she named Clementine. Saturday mornings, they ran laps around the yard while I drank coffee on the porch. And the quiet wasn't empty. It was full of the sound of a child laughing because she wasn't performing. She wasn't being small. She was just happy. One evening in October, Lily and I were sitting on the back porch. The air was cool. Clementine was asleep across Lily's feet. The sun was going down behind the tree line, and the sky had turned that deep amber that only lasts about 6 minutes before it's gone. Lily looked up from the book she was reading. "Mom?" "Yeah, sweetheart?" "Do you ever think about Grandma and Grandpa?" I looked at her. She wasn't sad. She wasn't asking because she missed them. She was asking because she was 10 and she was trying to understand how the world worked. "Sometimes," I said, "Are you mad at them?" "No." "Then what are you?" I thought about it. I thought about the dinner. The screen door. The 23 clicks in a dark kitchen. The coffee that went cold. The morning I made her lunch and let the system expire because I had finally stopped volunteering to hold up a building that was built on my back and named after people who never looked down. I'm free, I said. She nodded like that made perfect sense. Then she went back to her book. I sat there for a while longer. The sky dimmed. The porch light came on. Clementine shifted in her sleep. Lily turned a page. Some doors close so better ones can open. I never regretted a single second of it. If you enjoyed this story about protecting your children and knowing your worth, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories just like this one. Thanks for watching.